Well, good afternoon and croeso to the NFU Cymru Cop Cefn Glwad seminar. This is one of a series of events taking place this week under the umbrella of Countryside Cop. I hope you can all hear me clearly. We are running a webinar format today, which means all delegates will be kept on mute throughout the session. Questions for the Q&A session, though, may be asked by typing in the chat function, and I encourage you all to do that. My name is John Davies, NFU Cymru President. I'm a livestock farmer from Merthyr in Maid Wales, and I'm your chairman for today's event. So it's almost 2 years since NFU and NFU Cymru launched our shared vision to achieve net zero for agriculture by 2040, and this reflects our ambition to be the most climate-friendly food producers in the world. Today's event focuses on NFU Cymru's net zero vision, NFU Cymru's Growing Together strategy for sustainably increasing tree cover in Wales, Coed Cadw hedges and edges scheme supporting climate smart, nature friendly farming. And most importantly, we're going to hear from farmers about the actions they're already taking and the journey they're on to net zero on their own farms. And this is one of the best things of our jobs, mine and Ali's jobs, is going around, seeing the farm, seeing what's happening and learning from day to day. So I'm really delighted to introduce our speakers for this afternoon. First, we have our National Environment and Land Use Advisor, Rachel Lewis-Davies, who will provide a summary of our NFU Cymru Net Zero Vision and the recently published Growing Together strategy document. I'm also delighted to welcome Nigel Pugh from Coed Cadw, who will be setting out the hedges and edges concept. Then we're going to hear from our farmers. Jason Llewellin, an arable farmer from Pembrokeshire and winner of the first NFU Cymru Sustainable Agriculture Award. Then we have Abi Reader, a dairy farmer in the Vale of Glamorgan and chair of our NFU Cymru Milk Board. Then we move to north to Edward Griffith, beef and sheep farmer and member of the NFU Cymru Rural Affairs Board. And each of our speakers will have a few minutes, and at the end of the presentations, we're going to have a Q&A. We have a couple of pre-submitted questions, and do please ask questions. I urge you through the chat function once again, and I will do my best to get them in. So without further ado, I will now hand over to Rachel Lewis-Davies for NFU Cymru Net Zero and Growing Together. Over to you, Rach.
Hello, prynawn da, good afternoon. My presentation this afternoon will focus on introducing two important policy papers from NFU Cymru, as John has said, NFU Cymru Ambition for Net Zero, and then our recently published Growing Together strategy for sustainably increasing tree cover in Wales. So in January 2019, NFU Cymru and NFU established the ambitious goal of reaching net zero across the whole of agriculture by 2040. This is because we are clear that agriculture is uniquely placed to be part of the climate change solution, as we are both carbon source and very important carbon sink. Based on our assessments, which we have discussed with the UK Climate Change Commission, we believe this aim is challenging but attainable given the right incentives. We want to be clear that our net zero ambition is not about reducing our capacity to feed consumers with high quality, affordable Welsh food. We cannot achieve our climate ambitions by exporting Welsh production and our greenhouse gas emissions to other countries. We need a globally responsible approach. Nor is our vision an expectation that every farm can reach net zero. We recognise every farm starts the journey to net zero from a different place and needs to develop their own individual plans. We also want to be clear that there is no silver bullet, and the journey to net zero is very much about marginal gains, and it requires action across three broad headings of improving farming's productivity, efficiency to reduce the emissions intensity per unit of production, whether that be litre of milk or kilogram of lamb, We also need to improve and enhance land use to capture more carbon, whether that be through trees, hedgerows, grasslands, how we manage our soils and peatlands. And the third element that requires action is boosting our renewable energy capacity. So how do we do this? Well, we're clear we can't do this on our own. We will need to work in partnership with governments, with academia, and we also need to see the right signals and incentives. A lot of these measures will require investment that needs to be supported. We also need to work across a range of internationally recognised inventories. So it's more than just focused on the agricultural inventory. It is about the land use change and forestry as well. And we, as farmers, we also need to see mechanisms developed so that we're enabled to demonstrate meaningful progress at a farm level. And later in this session, we're going to hear about the actions farmers are taking themselves on their individual journeys to net zero. Moving quickly on to our Growing Together strategy that we really recently published. This is a strategy for sustainably increasing tree cover in Wales, developed by the NFU Cymru Rural Affairs Board in recent months. And it really goes to reiterate that farmers are well placed to be part of the solution. A word about the context. I think it's very important to recognise the ambitious tree planting targets established by Welsh Government. They want to see 180,000 hectares by 2050. 43,000 of those hectares need to be in the ground by 2030. And I think if you want to put that into context, the average sized farm in Wales is 48 hectares. So we're potentially looking at the complete afforestation of 3,750 farms. The targets are here and they will not go away. And I think we're already in some of our communities seeing external investors from outside of Wales buying up whole farms for complete afforestation. NFU wants to see a transition to net zero and the delivery of these tree planting targets to be spread fairly across society. Our rural communities must be safeguarded. We must also protect food security and ensure that our food production is not offshored. Our Growing Together strategy is very much about how farmers are the solution. We want to put farmers in the driving seat, and our farmers tell us that they're prepared to plant trees on what they identify as their least productive ground and at a scale that they feel is manageable. So more trees, more hedges integrated into farming systems rather than replacing farming systems. The report also sets out some of the barriers, but also some of the opportunities. So the economics needs to be right for farmers to take up tree planting at any scale, and few farmers can wait 30 or 40 years for a crop of timber. Another barrier that we've identified will be in the scheme complexity, and those farmers who have engaged with the Glassdeer woodland creation have found the process complicated and protracted, and it is a barrier to getting trees planted in Wales. Future policy also needs to consider land tenure with 30% of land under some sort of tenancy agreement. It is important that all active farmers in Wales are allowed to participate in increased tree cover on farms, and it's also important that there are safeguards in place to protect the tenanted sector, particularly those on fairly short-term tenancies. In terms of other barriers, we also identified that there are risks associated with tree planting, pest, disease. Not all trees live, and we need to recognise that and build in appropriate safeguards, particularly where there are contractual obligations either to government or part of new carbon trading opportunities. In terms of those opportunities, as I've said, farmers are very much the solution. It is very much about having the right tree in the right place for the right reason, and it's about understanding the purpose of what that tree planting is from the outset. So, you know, we recognise the multiple benefits, but some of the planting might be for a crop of timber, other planting is specifically for carbon, for connectivity in the landscape, for natural flood management, to enhance biodiversity. All of these are valid reasons to increase tree cover, and all must be properly rewarded. The report also touches on the concept of agroforestry, which is perhaps not widely understood, or there is confusion about what that means. But in its traditional sense, what we're talking about is more trees in hedgerows and more streamside corridors. And I think that is something that Welsh farmers are very willing to readily engage with. The report concludes with a number of key asks. I'll touch on a few of those now. Crucially, we call for the establishment of a Just Transition Commission. We are strongly of the view that the burden of decarbonisation cannot fall unequally on our rural communities. We also want to see a decision-making framework established to guide what are potentially land use change decisions, which are permanent, and it is very important that the economic, environmental and social impacts are understood before moving forward. We want to see mechanisms in the forthcoming agricultural bill to ensure that our food security is maintained. We believe that carbon targets have to be delivered alongside other strategic objectives, and that has to include the continued production of food in Wales. We want to see long-term financial support providing regular income for farm woodland and for existing and for additional resource that's planted in the years ahead. And to deliver more tree cover in Wales, we do have to see schemes that are simplified and that are properly rewarded over the long term, and that enable farmers to take forward tree planting at a scale that suits them. And I think there's a piece of research that exists that shows that if every farmer in Wales planted 1.73 hectares, then we would easily surpass that 2030 target. So that seems to us a more sensible way of taking forward tree planting targets, rather than seeing the complete deforestation of farms and the impact that will have on our rural communities. Finally, we want to see tenancy reform and safeguards for tenants and commoners so that they are not removed from the land. The publication of the report has been backed up by our Growing Together campaign, and this is very much about promoting the idea to our policymakers that the targets should not be taken forward so that they're a binary choice of farming or forestry. Our Growing Together campaign is about food, farming, trees, nature, landscapes and our rural communities all thriving together. We are in the process, or we've extended invitations to all MSs in Wales and key decision makers to participate with us in our Growing Together campaign, and we're inviting these politicians out on farms in the coming months to plant a Growing Together tree. And we're very grateful to Coed Cadw, the Woodland Trust in Wales, for kindly supplying those trees for our campaign. I will just finish by saying that both reports are available on the NFU Cymru website for everybody to read, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for clearly outlining the challenges and the opportunities for each and every farmer throughout Wales. And I think it's a really exciting time. It was great to welcome Nigel on farm just a couple of weeks ago with the Minister to plant the tree, and it's really great the number of trees that have been planted with MSs and other key decision makers across Wales so far. So without further ado, I hand over now to Nigel from Coed Cadw to speak to us on Hedges and Edges, their initiative. Over to you, Nigel.
Hi, afternoon all. Okay, to start with, just a short note about me and my motivations. I was born and raised in Builth Wells in mid Wales to a strong, vibrant farming community and a strong local economy. I learned to swim in the local rivers, and by 1978, at the age of 10, I knew those rivers were dying back then. My dad was in those rivers in 1926. He told me as a child of shoals of trout and salmon. Over the many years, I've learned that there were multiple reasons for why wildlife was disappearing, and certainly not one sector was to blame for their demise in isolation. In 2018, when I was first employed by Coed Cadw, I decided to campaign for an increase of agroforestry systems, or simply trees on farms. Why did I choose the campaign for increasing agroforestry? Agroforestry supports multiple stakeholders and outcomes for farmers, sustainable localized food systems, and helping to reverse the loss of nature, whilst reducing the impacts of climate extremes. Initially, the Agroforestry Wales campaign was an awareness-raising exercise and an examination of the state of play in Wales to how we were seeing and utilising trees within productive agriculture. We know that Wales is approximately 80% agricultural land, and we understand that we need sustainable, nature and climate positive food systems that in return play their part in reducing climate impacts for Welsh communities. I'd like to add here that we 100% acknowledge that all sectors must urgently slash their climate emissions. This is not the responsibility of one sector alone. We realised that agroforestry as a term was not readily understood. This brings me to Hedges and Edges, our proposed public goods basic farm payment scheme. Historically, native trees have been part of the Welsh farming and cultural landscape. We know that the Common Agricultural Policy's area-based payment incentivised the removal of trees. Hedges and Edges will effectively flip that on its head, paying to increase the quantity and quality of site-appropriate tree cover. We propose that Hedges and Edges is an area-based payment relating to the number of native trees and the quality of. It comprises of quality hedges, which includes standing trees within them. It includes shelter belts, tree, shrub-lined verges, gullies, and lining or water courses, all of which should integrate natural flood management thinking and its associated interventions. This is targeted tree planting that should be funded to deliver maximum public benefit early, that works across all public goods while supporting sustainable food production. It's a popular misconception that trees are not part of a productive farming system. They are very much a part of a sustainable productive farming system. Hedges and Edges was inspired by and created in co-production with our farming advisors and our Nantallen North Powys Partnership Farm Cluster Project, Slow the Flow, with the Severn Rivers Trust, and very much informed by the well-recognised farmer-led Pond Bren project. During the last Senate term, our statement of opinion submitted by the members of the Senedd, Llewellin Griffith, and co-submitted by Andrew R.T. Davies and Mike Hedges, saw over half of the members of the Senedd from across all parties recognise the urgent need to increase trees on farms to help mitigate the dual climate and ecological emergency. They recognised with the right support to retain and extend quality hedges and edges, farmers could deliver half of Wales tree cover targets, utilising less than 4% of their land. They subscribed to a new agricultural policy being significantly more supportive of agroforestry and to not penalise farmers for having trees on their land. Consider Hedges and Edges as a traditional form of Welsh agroforestry, which when integrated with natural flood management principles will reduce soil loss, protect and increase carbon stores, whilst helping to restore freshwater habitats. There's plenty of evidence around the positive effects of riparian trees on freshwater quality, screening pollutants and reducing over-sedimentation of all waterways. Hedges and edges will increase wildlife habitat. Quality hedgerows are brilliant biodiversity generalists and habitat connectors, whilst our native tree debris falling into fresh water is vital for biodiversity. Studies have shown dense, trimmed, stock-proof hedges have 3 times higher nest survival in comparison to leggy hedges with open structures. And the benefits for farmers. Hedges and edges can increase livestock yield. It can provide on-farm materials like livestock bedding, fuels and products, biosecurity, and a greater diversity of food production. Hedges and edges will provide shelter and shade for all types of livestock. Trees buffer the landscape, elevating ground temperatures in winter by up to 6 degrees Celsius, increasing lying comfort and feeding opportunities for livestock, whilst reducing rain and high wind speeds, leading to improved animal welfare and increased yields. According to the Met Office forecast, by 2050, every second summer will be like the one we experienced in 2018, the joint hottest summer on record, and this prediction could well be conservative. In these hot conditions, crops under the shade of trees can be the only green part of a field, and you'll always see livestock voting for the shade of trees. Cattle begin to suffer heat stress at 18 degrees Celsius, experience moderate heat stress at 20 degrees, severe heat stress at 25, and at 31 they're in a state of emergency. When livestock is heat stressed, blood is removed from non-vital systems such as the reproductive and digestive tracts to the skin to help the cooling process. As much as half of the blood in the digestive tract can be diverted, making the gut membrane very permeable to toxins. Trees help to reduce livestock stress. For example, social licking accounts for 78% of social interactions in silver pasture grazing systems, compared with only 48% in open pasture. Social licking is beneficial because it reduces stress by lowering the heart rate. Using trees to rub away old hair, fleece, dead skin, seeds, parasites such as ticks that can penetrate the skin also reduce heart rate. In addition, a healthy coat and skin are barriers to disease. Leaf nutrition from trees is highly comparable to grasses and other forages in terms of fat, carbohydrate, and protein content. Mineral content in tree browse can be high. For example, willow is a very good source of zinc. Trees also contain condensed tannins, reducing the amount of methane produced. Leaves can be browsed directly or be preserved as tree fodder or as hay and silage. There are many palatable tree species such as aspen, willow, ash, rowan, hazel, oak, Scots pine, juniper, holly, birch, hawthorn, beech and alder. Yes, this and other types of agroforestry of which we are funding in Wales is a step beyond hedges and edges. Livestock grazed amongst trees has been ranked as the 9th most powerful of 80 climate mitigation solutions and as the most powerful of all agricultural strategies by the Westminster Committee on Climate Change. According to the new NFU survey of 400 randomly chosen members, it found hedgerow restoration to be the most popular, with 89% support, followed by improved grassland and fertiliser management, whilst planting trees and agroforestry was backed by 70% of its members. Many from across sectors feel that hedges and edges can work for farmers right across Wales as a public goods basic farm payment scheme. And finally, I'd just like to say we are proud to supply the ceremonial trees for the NFU Cymru Growing Together campaign. that symbolise sectors and all political parties coming together to collaborate. We will all need to work together to reduce the impacts of climate change for Welsh communities, and if we are to start to reverse biodiversity collapse for our future generations. Wales can be a shining exemplar model to the UK and the world of landscape scale climate mitigation and wildlife restoration, whilst keeping farmers farming and delivering sustainable localised food systems. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Nigel. And if we can effectively work together, we'll see all of our ambitions. Next, I want to ask Jason Llewellin for his presentation. Jason is not just talking the talk, he's walking the walk. It was great to present him with the prize for sustainable farming, and I'm really excited to hear what Jason's got to say. Over to you, Jason.
Hello, yeah, I'm Jason Llewellin, and we have an all arable farm here in Pembrokeshire, which is farmed in partnership with my mum, dad, wife, and we have one full-time employee. We have approximately 300 hectares of combinable crops grown on owned, rented and contract farmed land. Plus we have woodland and cliff and rough grazing on top of that. The main holding is grown in a 6-year rotation with wheat, beans, oilseed rape and potatoes. The potato land being rented out to another grower. Over the years, I think we've done quite a few actions that have been a real benefit to the farm, but have also helped us progress towards a net zero position. Firstly, approximately 20 years ago, Dad and Mum planted 25 acres of woodland on some very small patches around the farm. Small corners, shallow parts, steep parts, basically to try and make the fields more productive or more workable, but also to provide some shelter for the crops from the coastal location that we're in. So we've seen a good benefit from doing that. And our tillage systems over the years have changed. We've moved to reducing the depth, reducing the passes, reducing compaction with better wheels and tyres, and we've seen the soil improve its workability. We also chop quite a lot of straw and leave residues as the straw and the chaff on the surface, which helps protect it from the heavy rain that we have here in Wales. And also it's helped to increase the soil health. And by doing that over the years, we've reduced our fuel usage. And in some years, if we have a dry harvest, the usage is under 100 litres a hectare, including the drying fuel. So that's seen a great benefit. We try and grow cover crops in between if we've got a spring cropping going in. So we try and establish that in the autumn and incorporate it or direct drill or lightly cultivate before we drill the spring crops. And again, that helps to protect from the winter rain and also capture up the spare nutrients that are about over the winter. Hedgerows, we try and manage on a need to trim basis. So we have a lot of cliff land which doesn't need trimming, and we have some more stuff that grows quite a lot. So that gets managed as needed, as does the margins around each field, and also we've got some streamside corridors which help protect from soil erosion when the potatoes are in the ground, and help with lee wraps as far as our pesticide applications are concerned. So we've seen a good benefit from them, and also then they do sequester carbon whilst they're established. From an energy point of view, we installed a wind turbine in 2012, which in theory should produce what we need, but the usage and production curves don't match each other, especially in the summer during harvest for drying, etc. So that's something that we need to possibly look at, is how we fill in those holes in production. And then we've got some thermal panels on the houses for hot water, for heating and hot water usage. So those are briefly some of the things that we think we've been doing anyway, which is all going to help us towards achieving our net zero. So things we're sort of then investigating, as previously mentioned, is how we produce more of our own electricity. So we're going to investigate solar PV and possibly storage to help fill in those gaps. I think, as we all know, the nitrogen price is escalating currently, so our one concern is how we can sort of possibly move away from reliance on bagged nitrogen or liquid nitrogen as we use. We've investigated manures in the past, but have been wary of importing weed problems and other things that we don't want, which would then put over reliance on herbicides. So we've sort of gone away from that and done the other things like the cover cropping and the chopping straw and that sort of thing to help. So one thing we're doing this year, we've taken part in the grain yen, which is the yield enhancement network. So we're going to analyse the grain and benchmark that so we can see how our nutrients are being utilised. So whether we're putting the right thing on, enough of one, or we got a limiting factor, or even some of our micro and macronutrients need looking at. The same goes for soil organic matter testing. We have done some in the past, and we got reasonable soil organic matters for an arable farm. So we're sort of between 4 and 6, but we want to sort of do that bit more widespread and more often to try and quantify our soil improvements and see how much carbon we are actually helping to store. And then one of our things we've started to do this year is we started growing with the not needing the EFAs anymore. We've used those bits of land to grow sunflowers and phacelia on, which is going to be, the sunflowers are going to be left for winter bird food to try and help biodiversity, because we're trying to overall reduce our reliance on insecticides. So we're trying to increase our farm biodiversity, so we've got increased beneficials, and yeah, just trying to use that. But it's quantifying whether we need the insecticide on what weather we're having and and that sort of thing is the big decision, is whether we use them or not. And ultimately we feel we've got quite a relatively local market, so all our straw goes within 12 miles, that's stuff that we sell, and all the grain, the wheat and the beans go, majority of it goes 40 miles to Carmarthen. So on a local market thing, we feel as if we've got some quite short supply chains. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason, giving us that mainly arable approach from Pembroke, West Wales. Next, we move to Abi now, our dairy board chairman. Abi milks cows very close, well, in the Vale of Ogren. So it's great now to move to another part of Wales and hear some of the exciting things going on Abi's farm. So over to you, Abi, without further ado.
Thanks very much, John, and afternoon, everyone. Yeah, talking about net zero, it's something that farmers are talking about whatever location you happen to be in at the minute. Generally, I have to say that lots of farmers seem to fall into two categories. There's the farmers that are saying, oh yeah, I've tried the carbon, you know, I've done my carbon footprint measuring, I've done X, Y, and Z, and I'm pretty certain that I'm net zero. And then there's the other category of farmer that is saying, I really haven't got a clue what all this is about. And generally, in some ways, I tend to find I fall into that second category. I haven't done a carbon footprint. I'm confused by the tools that are out there, and there are about 200. I'm overwhelmed by how much work it might take and whether I'm capable of answering those questions. So I think really, if you're a farmer who sat there listening to this, don't get overwhelmed by the fact that you haven't done a carbon footprint. Because as I go on to say now shortly, there are other things that you can do that are actually working towards that goal. So what I hope in the future is that as part of a discussion group, we will sit down and look at 1 or 2 carbon footprint tools and see if we can work our way through them a bit at a time and do it in a supported way. And I hope that will be a bit better. So for the time being, I find the easiest way to focus on how to reach net zero is really to look at the NFU 3 goals, because it just sets it out for me. So we've got our looking at renewable energies, we can look at carbon sequestration, and we can look at efficiency. So I'm actually going to jump to efficiency first, because I find that one the most perplexing, and yet really it's probably the easiest one for all of us, and it's the one that we should all be chasing, and we already are. So when we talk about efficiency for reaching net zero, we are literally saying get better at what you do. And it seems so piecemeal. You wonder whether you're really on the right course, but you are. And I think really we just need to, if we're looking at livestock production, if you want to accept that methane is a very strong heat trapping gas, then anything that we can do on our farms to get more from less is always going to be a benefit. So if we can get more litres from a cow, or get her to be more efficient in what she does, then that is always going to help towards a carbon footprint. So how do we do that? I think that, generally lots of us are working with KPIs. You may not necessarily have them strictly written down, but again, if I talk about dairy farming, I'm always looking at the milk records. How are the yields doing? We're looking at grass growth. We're doing the soil testing. We've got the health and disease data. So we're focusing on all of these things, and that's really good, because if you're recording these KPIs, you've got a record of how you're getting from A to B. And it really is as simple as that. It's about striving to do better. And not only that, I think it's great because it's good for your bottom line as well. So we're doing two things at the same time, which is always a fantastic goal. So a couple of examples of what we've done, perhaps one of our more interesting ones. We did a bit of an experiment with some of the fields on the farm. So you can more or less divide our land into three. So we're one block of land, but we have got very much an arable area, very much a dairy or cattle grazing area, and then very much a sheep area, and that's completely defined by soil type. We had one field that was over in our grass block, which we used to put down to crop production because it was a nice size field, very easy to work, and seemed to be, great suited for crops. But when we did a record in 1 year of looking at the fuel usage and the inputs that we had to put into growing a crop in that field versus growing a crop in our main arable area of the farm, actually it far exceeded what it should have been doing for the crop that it was yielding. We added up the sums, we looked at the fuel usage, we looked at all those inputs, and we decided that really the best thing was to put that back down to grass. So it's gone back down to a long-term lay, and it was certainly a good decision. And for ease of management, that's a really good thing to look at, just to consider whether what you're using that field for, is it really efficient? So production efficiency is one. Renewables I find really frustrating. I think that there are lots of opportunities there for us as farmers, but actually our ability to tap into them is really complicated. So we would struggle to tap into the national grid, despite being only 3 miles as a crow flies from the centre of Cardiff. I do not have three-phase electricity. We do not have suitable transformers. No one appears to want the energy that we could produce to export. We've got some fantastic south-facing roofs, and we've looked at putting up solar panels to heat our own water, but it's still not cost efficient in terms of the investment for the return. So we've had lots of quotes as well for wind, water. At the moment, these ideas are just parked. They're still very much there if we want to get back into it, but at the moment they're just not going to work for us. Carbon sequestration then is the final one. I think perhaps as farmers we'll find that one quite exciting, because it's an opportunity to become a carbon sink by pulling that carbon out of the atmosphere. At the moment, there isn't much research out there in terms of what you can do. So probably the best advice, I've heard a lot of horror stories at the moment of, Rachel alluded to it earlier, but of various companies that are getting involved, approaching farmers and getting contracts for hiring your ground and using you for carbon sequestration. And I would urge you to be very careful that if somebody approaches you wanting to do that, please do seek a bit of advice from the NFU, because there are quite a few horror stories out there. But in terms of carbon sequestration, there are a lot of opportunities. And at the moment, my best suggestion would be look after what you've got. and wait and see what else is going to be coming. However, I am aware that there are a number of trials going on throughout Wales, and I am pleased that we are part of a very small trial on my farm looking at the benefits of carbon sequestration through agroforestry. And probably the thing to highlight most about that is it's great that we can participate in a trial, and it is a small trial, so it's not a huge hardship to put up a corner of land for it. But in terms of being able to record that data, access it, make it be in any way, shape or form meaningful, has only become possible through external funding. And we are actually working with the Woodland Trust on this particular project. And it's just really to highlight that there are lots of opportunities there for farmers, but we're not going to be able to do it on our own because we just can't access those skill sets and those type of funding pots. So, keep looking out for it, keep listening to what other farmers are doing. So really, my conclusion is your contribution to net zero may seem very piecemeal, but that doesn't mean that it's not important. Please keep recording all those KPIs, keep chasing for those efficiencies, and keep looking for what is out there. And really the most important message, genuinely the most important message, shout about what you're doing, because so many people out there don't really understand what it is we're doing and want to hear those good messages. The NFU have got the Net Zero Pledge. Please go online and tag yourself in that map so that if John is going out and talking, or Aled, and they're going out to talk to anybody who is interested in what we're doing as an industry, they can refer to that map and say, go on there and see what everybody is doing in Wales in terms of their commitments to net zero. So yeah, keep telling the story, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Abi. Please, all of you, go on that map, see the excellent work that's going on, and let's add to that, and let's really grow the number of applications on that. Now we go to North Wales, to a beef farmer, to Edward. Welcome, Edward, over to you.
Right, thank you, John. Yes, as John said, I'm a beef and sheep farmer on the Llyn Peninsula. Our farm is a lowland farm, and most of our land is quite productive, but there are still many areas on the farm which are quite marginal and on which I would be quite happy to grow trees. We've already been planting for many years a lot of hedges and hedgerows, and over the last 4 years we've created 4 streamside corridors and a pond. However, I'm very much against planting trees on good land here in Wales. I think we should really be looking after our good agricultural land and should grow as much food on it as possible, and try to increase our self-sufficiency. Plus, after all, we've got to remember that some countries in the world will be losing agricultural land due to climate change in the future, and some countries will even be cutting down trees in order to feed countries like ourselves. However, as a farmer, I've always tried my best to improve the efficiency and productivity of my business, mainly to increase the profit that I'm doing. But the past couple of years, I realised as well that improving efficiency and productivity will lower the carbon footprint of the business. And as an example of that, I will just go over a few things we've done over the past years with our suckler herd. Now, we've had a suckler herd here for over 30 years, and about 20 years ago we decided to breed our own replacements and to have a closed herd. And at the same time we decided to run the bulls out with the cows for, well, to take it down from something like 15 weeks to 9 weeks. Now, these changes meant that we are now calving heifers at 2 years old, which is a lot more carbon efficient than calving older heifers. We are also culling cows from the herd a lot quicker than we were before. And at weaning time, when we wean, we will sell as soon as possible all the empty cows, as well as any cows which aren't producing as well as they should. We'll cull them quite quickly. And we can do that because we've got a steady stream of heifers coming through the system. Now, these changes, small changes, they add up to a lot. and the fertility of our herd has been increasing over the years, which meant that its productivity has been increasing, but at the same time its carbon footprint has been going down. So the next big change we did was 10 years later, when we decided to finish the male calves as bulls instead of steers. Now, bulls are a lot more efficient at converting feed, and because of this we found that they were reaching slaughter age a good 8 to 9 months quicker than the steers. And because we had less steers grazing the farm, we had more grass, which we used to keep more cows. So in a few years' time, the same land was producing more beef, but at the same time, that beef had a lower carbon footprint per kilogram. Now, we still, I felt, had one very weak link left in the system, and that was the fact that we were buying in all the feed and straw to finish the bulls on. And if I was honest, the costs were starting to spiral out of control, and I felt we had to do something to sort of get this situation better. So last year we grew spring barley on the farm for the first time in many years and fed that to the bulls with some silage, and they did well. But the best thing for us really was that it brought down our costs of production considerably. So we've decided now to set ourselves a target to be growing all the feed that the cattle require on the farm, to be 100% self-sufficient, and I can only believe that that will yet again lower our carbon footprint. Having mentioned so much about carbon footprint, I've got to admit I haven't a clue what the carbon footprint is of our farm. I couldn't even hazard a guess. I'm that clueless really, but we are in the process of doing a carbon audit. I've just had some forms, received some forms from Farming Connect, and I've had a quick look, and there's a huge amount of boxes to fill there. They'll probably be the most complicated forms I've ever filled, and that's saying a lot. But we're going to do it, and it will be interesting to know exactly where we stand. But the common sense conclusion I've come to out of all of this is that common sense to me says that if you do increase your productivity, there is a direct link there to decreasing your carbon footprint, and that should be an incentive for us all as farmers to do, and eventually, hopefully, through all the other things like generating electricity and all this, that and the other, we should hopefully then be able to achieve net zero. That's it, John, I think.
Thank you very much, Edward. That's great. I think without further ado, we will move to the Q&A session. There's been quite a lot of talk about carbon footprinting, and I think you have done some carbon footprinting at home, haven't you, Jason? I've heard from the other two that they haven't yet got on that journey. We've done some here at Pentre. We're roughly half the Welsh average on our carbon footprint for the beef operation. We're virtually self-sufficient. We grow all our own feed in terms of spring barley and winter wheat, and then we do 4 cuts of silage a year, so that really helps with the carbon footprint. But we're not as low as the guys that won the Beef Farmer of the Year thing in London last week with the Farmers Weekly Awards. I think they're down on like 6 or 7. We're about 8, I think, on ours. But so there's some really exciting opportunities there, but the Welsh average is massively lower than the global average, and I'm sure Aled will come to it later. He's got a great stat about how many fewer dairy cows we'd need in the world if they were all as efficient as Welsh dairy cows, but I'll leave that for Aled later. Jason, carbon footprinting, have you done anything at home? I was with Simon Best, who won Arable Farmer of the Year with Farmers Weekly Awards just a couple of weeks ago over in Ireland. He's got some really impressive figures in terms of his soil carbon. Can you tell us a little bit about your carbon footprinting experience possibly, or your soil organic matter and your soil carbon? Because some of the latest innovation there in terms of how we can get carbon down into the soil is really, really exciting. Over to you, please.
Yeah, we have started the carbon footprinting process. We did it with the Farming Connect arable discussion group that's down here. We had one meeting back just before harvest. So the plan is to continue it through the winter. It highlighted the fact about our organic matter testing, really. We did some 5 or 6 years ago on a few fields, and then we repeated it, and we just need to do more fields, and we need to probably do it more often, really, to be honest. So yeah, we felt reasonably happy with our organic matters from, I think they're 3 to 6 or something. They range from, considering it's been a arable farm for probably 30, 40 years, with minimal amount of manure has been added. So we're hopeful that our cover cropping, straw chopping, cultivation policy is sort of helping us in the right direction, really.
Thank you, Jason. We've got a couple of questions here. I can see one, somebody's a little bit frustrated that they've applied for some hedgerow under the Glassdale Small Grants scheme, and they've been turned down, so they find it frustrating to be turned down on one hand and be told they need to plant more trees on the other. I guess that's going to be quite contingent on the CSR review now at the end of the month, and what the budget allocation is in terms of that going forward. But Nigel, I'm going to ask you, you know, we think it could be quite a simple measure to recognise and reward the tree cover that's presently on farms through existing mapping with the SAF. What sort of payment rates would Coed Cadw propose for this going forward to encourage an extension of this, and how would you make that work?
I'd have to give you a straightforward answer. It's not for us to outline what those payments would be. That would have to be done in negotiation, I suppose, with the Welsh Government. That is not for us to stipulate. I mean, again, going back to the area-based payments, the basic farm payment of previous, that did encourage the removal of trees by making more land available to agricultural production. Hedges and edges basically does flip that on its head, and you're basically rewarded for the amount of tree cover within productive agriculture. And I'm sorry, but that's the only answer I could give.
That's fine, Nigel. You know, I think it's about creating the right levels of payment that encourage and reward, but that are fair as well and deliver good value, I guess, isn't it? And, you know, it's about working together to create those. Next, we have a question around from Edward Perkins, and it has just come up on my screen. Do we know the amounts of carbon stored by pasture and crops, and how do the amounts of carbon with tree planting, particularly when in early stages of the tree planting operation? I think I'm going to go to Rachel quickly on this. We do have some data around this, but there's more work being done. Rach.
Thanks, John. I think there is some research around this, and Edward is right to identify that it's very much related to where we are in the life cycle of those trees. But certainly there are some figures that some research that we can point to perhaps later that highlights the carbon sequestration of grass, and I think it is something that we continue to emphasise to policymakers. It's not about it is about increasing tree cover, but it is also recognising the existing carbon stores in our soils, our grasslands, our existing trees, our existing hedgerows, as well as transitioning to increasing tree cover in line with targets in the future. All of these need to be accounted for. All of these need to be properly rewarded. And I think, as Edward rightly points out, in the early stages of tree establishment, then, you know, perhaps those gains are not as big as we think they are, particularly when we're planting, or when the advice is to plant and use plastic guards, and there's obviously a carbon cost to those. And also, as I highlighted earlier, also because not all of these trees live, for a start. they die. You know, it's very much like farming, isn't it? Not everything is successful. It depends when you plant, how you plant, depends what sort of pest and disease burden you've got. So it's like farming, it's a risky business. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And as you can see, we're all focused on taking steps to net zero, and I'm going to give both Abi and Edward an opportunity to answer this now, and this is for our farmers listening. So I'm going to start with Abi. So what advice would you give? What's a good first step towards net zero for all our farmers listening here today, Abi, and then I'll come to you after, Edward.
Well, I think certainly for me, it's recording the improvements that I was making in our dairy production system. So it's, you know, it's looking at, well, we started off looking at our yields this year and working out what it was going to be that next year. And let's just be clear, this isn't about what system you want to choose. This isn't, maybe it was appropriate to keep the yield the same for the next year, but it's making sure that you record it so that you've got those changes. It's health very much for me, I think, is really important. If you've got a healthy animal, then you're going to get the best out of her. And disease control is such a no-brainer, and biosecurity, but record it. You know, if you've done, and don't be afraid to investigate what disease is in your herd. Do some investigation, speak to your vet, get a record of it, set some targets, and measure yourself as you go through. And I can absolutely guarantee that that will make a huge difference to your carbon footprint. So that's what I did.
Thank you, Abi. And next we move to Edward. What tips would you give, Edward?
Well, obviously, every farm in Wales is different, totally different. So every farm will have to do what's best, what the best they can do on that farm. But try and sort of improve your efficiency, your productivity. That will bring down your carbon footprint, as I've said. And there was one good example which I didn't mention in my previous speech, but a few years ago on the farm we moved from set stocking the cattle to rotational paddock grazing with them, and we found out that we were growing a lot more grass with no extra fertilizer input. If anything, could be slightly less. Also, we found that the rotational grazing was the weeds weren't surviving as well there. So we haven't been spraying those fields for 3 years with chemicals. So I think it's something that can be done on every farm in Wales. It doesn't have to be the best land. It could be done on really, really unproductive land. But if you change from set stocking to rotational paddock grazing, you will definitely improve productivity, and I would suspect at the same time bring down your carbon footprint. That's just one example, John.
Yeah, excellent example there, Edward. You know, grass utilisation, we can all improve our grass utilisation, I'm sure, and there's a real opportunity there. I think you'll all see from the panel today, we're all excited about the future. We're all willing to learn, and we're all willing to evolve and adapt. And but we all want to be healthy food producers in the future with the lowest possible carbon footprint and environmental impact. So thank you all, our panel. I'm a bit of a stickler for time, and we are getting close to time now. So I'd really like to hand over to our Deputy President now, Mr. Aled Jones, who will sum up and make some closing remarks. Thank you all the panelists.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. Diolch yn fawr iawn. No, it's a real pleasure to sum up at the end of our seminar today, the NFU Cymru Cop Cefn Glwad seminar. It's been so inspiring listening to all our participants today and those who have been sharing their experiences, practical experiences that they've been carrying out on their farms. Now, it's the path to net zero will differ from farm to farm, and as we've heard from our speakers today, there are practical things who will probably fit on some of their farms and not on other farms. So that involvement and understanding of the practical measures that they can undertake is so crucial to them. Now, it is important as farmers that we set our ambition to be net zero for the future. And that ambition comes quite clearly, and I think Rachel stressed this at the beginning, and it comes without abdicating our responsibilities as food producers. And I think Edward touched on it as well in saying that the importance of maintaining that productive land on his farm. So that's crucial, and that comes with our care and being custodians of the environments that we live into. So the messages are clear. The demands on our resources are huge, and we must make sure that food production is central to a policy, whilst of course maintaining and caring for the environment that we live in and the biodiversity likewise. Thank you, Nigel. It was very, very encouraging always to listen to you, and the thought that you always put into the thinking that you have. Now, before I reiterate my appreciation to all the speakers, John put me on the spot, didn't he, on the number of dairy cows that we have. Globally, there are 264 million dairy cows in the world. Now, if that milk was produced by Welsh producers like Abi, we'd only need 76 million. So just bear that in mind. Now, anyway, thank you, John, for chairing today. It was a real pleasure being with you on farm in Merthyr Cynnog 4 weeks ago, and having the pleasure of our Minister, Leslie Griffiths, for Rural Affairs, planting the tree on your farm. And what inspired me was to see 3 generations, Llewellin, John and Brychan, together planting that tree. Now, we are Welsh farming, and we will be here for generations to come. And we are proud Welsh farmers as well, proud to put that jumper on every morning as we produce that food, and long may that continue. Llawer o ddiolch I bawb sydd wedi ymuno hefo ni heddiw yma yn y seminar yma. Mae'n ganolog i'n holl feddylfryd sydd gyda ni fel ffermwyr yng Nghymru, bod ni'r gorau yn gofalu amdan y wlad sydd wedi rhoi i ni a'r bwyd da ni'n ei gynhyrchu hefyd. A byd i hynny gynyddu ac I barhau am genedlaethau I ddod. So thank you all for your participation today. Thank you all for those who've joined with us. It's so encouraging that so many have put the time apart today to be with us on this seminar. And I'm pleased to say that the rollout of Senedd members planting trees is growing, and that agenda is certainly taking a lot of attention. That strategy, Growing Together, there's a lot of thought that went into that title, Growing Together. We must be the architects of our future, and may that continue. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi gyd. Thank you all.